Welcome back again to Ken Bostrom Ministries, United in His Purpose television broadcast. Thank you for being with us today, and a special thank you for the production partners of Ken Bostrom Ministries who make it possible for us to do this. We are so thankful. You know, everything in the body of Christ is teamwork. Some people go and some people send. And so we just thank you that for all of those who feel like they want to be a part of what we're doing, we thank you for that. Anything, you can go on to kenbostromministries.org and check out everything we're doing. But I don't want to take any of our special speaker's time today, so I'm just going to introduce you right now to Wally Wood, and I'm just going to turn it over to you. Now, I forgot to mention last time on the program that go to his email, or to his,
website.
He's on Facebook, or his website, wallywoodministries.com. Wally Wood is real easy to spell.
Yeah.
I mean, it spells exactly like it sounds. So welcome again, and I have my notebook ready.
Good.
And I'm ready to take notes.
Well, thank you, Mary. And thank you all for tuning in for the second program. This is the segment where we talk about the ministry. And this ministry has been built around end-time Bible prophecy, the written word and the spoken word. And what I'm going to take you through today is the track record of this ministry. As I mentioned to you in the previous program, there's a time capsule of what I call a time capsule of prophetic events that have taken place in this ministry since 1972, which the Lord has allowed me to speak into the leadership of nations and their outcomes, their progress, and things of this nature. The vision that I had in August 1972, working at a local radio station, the Lord visited me and He said, "My son, I've shown you in my word what's going to happen. Now I'm going to show you how. You're not to say a word without the documentation to back it up. I'll see to it you have all the documentation you need." Now, that's a pretty big promise on the part of the Lord, especially the fact since I'm a grocery clerk. I've been in the grocery business all my life, and that's my tent-making business when I'm not out doing other work that He assigns me to. But of note, I'm not going to go through all the things that the Lord's had me address, but certain high points. Tuesday, November 10th, 1972, Election Day between Richard Nixon and George McGovern. And I'm on a radio talk show here in Houston from midnight to 2 a.m. as a special guest. And the host is asking me to give my take on the outcome of the next day's election. Who's going to win the election, Nixon or McGovern? All right. I was asked who I felt would be the winner of this, given my position as a journalist, news journalist, and newspaper, as well as my prophetic background. My very first prophecy was this: it's no big secret who's going to win. Richard Nixon's got this thing sewn up in the bag. George McGovern's been the best campaign manager that Nixon could ever hope for. All they had to do was let George do all the talking and keep Nixon's mouth shut, and Richard would get all the votes. Keep Nixon behind closed doors in Washington, Moscow, and Peking, and let George do all the talking. All right? I said, but what we don't realize is that both we and he, speaking of Nixon, are being set up for a fall on this, the biggest sham of an election in American political history in over 50 years. I said, I don't claim to be a prophet. I never have. I'm not saying thus saith the Lord. I've got too much fear of the Lord to say that. All I've got is this gut feeling. Now, at that time, I was going to a denomination that did not teach the Holy Spirit. Mm-hmm. So I knew very little about the Holy Ghost. All I had was this gut feeling. And this is what I said: don't be surprised if the man who follows Mr. Nixon becomes this country's first unelected president. People were calling in that night saying, "You're crazy, you're out of your mind, you don't know what you're talking about." I said, folks, we're not the same people we used to be. Given the right circumstances, we can justify anything. Then the second prophecy came out of my mouth, in which I saw no more than 5 administrations remaining in this country as a free nation. And something was going to happen in the 4th administration that would guarantee that change. And I have it pictured right here on the screen. So, counting back, with Nixon being the first in 1972, followed by Gerald Ford, the first unelected president. He came forth in 1974, upon Mr. Nixon's resignation because of Watergate. I spoke those words that night on radio 2.5 months before Watergate broke, 2.5 years before Gerald Ford came in as our country's first unelected president. Following him was Jimmy Carter in 1977. He was followed by Ronald Reagan in 1981, and he was followed by George H.W. Bush in 1989. Now, I'd said in the second prophecy that something was going to happen between the third and the fifth administration that would guarantee the change of our nation being a free country. Mr. Reagan came in. When he came in, he was the, and I'm not going to give out conspiratorial names here, but he was not expected to win. And the top 3 candidates that were expected to beat out Reagan, they all fell. Reagan came in. And there's a lot of things that took place behind the scenes that I'm not going to go into at this particular point that were tremendous. But with Mr. Bush, the Berlin Wall fell, and with that was the birth of what we know as globalization, because that wall symbolized the segmentation of the world ideologically and philosophically. The Berlin Wall fell, globalization was started, and the New World Order was unveiled by Mr. Bush in the Oval Office in 1990. Listen to this.
Have before us the opportunity to forge for ourselves and for future generations a new world order, a world where the rule of law, not the law of the jungle, governs the conduct of nations. When we are successful, and we will be, we have a real chance at this new world order, an order in which a credible United Nations can use its peacekeeping role to fulfill the promise and vision of the UN's founders.
Wow.
That was in 1990 in the Oval Office. Now, what we're going to go into at this particular point, well, in 1974, the Lord allowed me to write my first book on a cashless society, a world without money, in which I talked about the day would come that there would be a central computer system that would oversee all of your financial transactions around the world. And you won't be able to buy or sell without the approval of that central computer system. And I called it the world of CENTCOM, for central computer. Well, in 1981, the internet was birthed, and was known at that time as the information superhighway, as you can see at the front cover of Popular Mechanics, calling it such at that time. Following that, I was asked to publish a follow-up to that book. I prayed about it, and the Lord gave me this word, diginomics, for digital economics, in 1998. I wrote to all the English-speaking dictionaries because the word didn't exist, and submitted it to them. In 2007, the Merriam-Webster dictionary picked it up online and credited me with coming up with a new word in the English language. And now online dictionaries are picking it up everywhere. If you were to Google the word diginomics, you'll find that it's got global tracking. There are conferences, conventions, world trade being done under that heading. Books have been written about it. There are 2 professors in Spain that are teaching a diginomics course, and it's also being picked up in Europe. There are conferences being held by Swede Bank, claiming origination of the word for themselves, but they're speaking on diginomic conferences around the world. And being the father of that word, it just absolutely thrills me to the core that God has spread this thing.
Yeah.
I chose not to trademark it or patent it because I wanted it to become a word for the world. I wanted the dictionaries to pick up on it. They won't touch a patented word.
And they did.
And they picked up on it because I left it trademark free. So that was my first book on cashless society, and now we have the internet as CENTCOM. Sunday, March 29th, 1981, I'm speaking at a church in Conroe, sharing what I'm doing with you right now, my prophetic testimony, but in greater detail. At a certain point, I made this comment, and President Reagan was in office. The time has now come for there to be a public assassination attempt upon the president, but it will fail. It will be a warning shot to get him to cooperate with the internationalists, which he is not prone to do. That was Sunday, March 29th, 1981. The next day, Monday, March 30th, it happened. While leaving a speaking engagement at the Washington Hilton Hotel in Washington, D.C., President Reagan and 3 others were shot and wounded by John Hinckley, Jr. No one was more surprised than I was that it happened that quickly. And I was helping a friend clean some apartment pools when we got the word on this. He came over, he whisked me away, sat me down in a chair. He says, "This is what you've been talking about." I made the comment, I said, "Tom, this is not a life-threatening wound. It's a .22 bullet that went on the left side, hitting the president at a certain rib." It would be 5 hours later that we find out that it was a .22 bullet entering the left side, hitting a certain number rib, and he was pulling through quite well. So, again, the Lord is very, very timely on these matters. On Wednesday, March 3rd, 1983, I'm having lunch with Dr. Hilton Sutton, who's passed away now, but he was known as the grandfather of modern-day prophecy. And he and I had been friends for a long time. We're having lunch at his headquarters in Humble, Texas. And I mentioned to him, we're talking about world events, and I mentioned to him that Menachem Begin of Israel and President Reagan of the United States are among the last of God's men sitting on seats of power in the world today. When these two men are gone, there'll be none other. And that Begin will leave first, and his departure will be peaceful. I can't speak so much for the peacefulness of Reagan's departure, however, and there's a story behind that too. So, on August 18th, 1983, just a few months later, about 6 months later or so, I had a dream. The Lord seldom ever gives me prophetic dreams, but in this dream, I found myself in a large auditorium packed with people. I see on stage women dressed in evening attire and a single male MC in the middle. So my perception is that we're at a beauty pageant. My attention is drawn to the left side of the stage through a door to the left of the stage, and I'll point to it here. Well, it doesn't pick up the pointer. I'll be darned.
I saw it.
And through that door come Mr. and Mrs. Reagan into this audience. Standing ovation, much noise. They're coming directly below my vantage point. It appears I'm on a second floor balcony looking down. I see all the facial wrinkles of Mr. Reagan. This was like watching it on TV. They enter into a center part of the seating, and at which point he is approached by Jody Powell, former press secretary for President Carter. The two men shake hands. Then I see this white flash, a blinding flash. I'm blinded. When my sight comes back, I see Mr. and Mrs. Reagan lying on the floor in a pool of blood, security forces hastening Jody Powell away, mass pandemonium everywhere, and then I sit up.
This is a vision?
This is a dream.
Okay, a dream.
A dream in the night.
Okay.
And I'm sweating, and I didn't know what I was looking at. And the Lord didn't give me immediate answer to it when I asked. But in the days that followed, now the dream was August 18th, 1983. On Sunday, the 21st of August, Benigno Aquino is assassinated on the tarmac at the airport in the Philippines upon his return to his homeland after spending 25 years in exile here in the States. This is the beginning of the anti-Marcos revolution in the Philippines, all right? A few years after his death, his wife takes over as president of that nation in 1986. But in all the news that was taking place at that time, we learned that Mr. Reagan was planning a trip to the Philippines to visit his friend, President Marcos, which is an island nation known for their beauty pageants. And then it hit me with that dream. I'm saying, Lord, that dream, is it a warning or is it a prophecy? And the Lord said it's a warning for the president not to go to the Philippines. And some other talk took place between us, but I won't take the time on that now. Sunday, August 28th, Sam Donaldson is reporting on ABC News that Mr. Begin is seriously considering resigning as Prime Minister of Israel. That goes back to what I told Hilton Sutton on March 3rd, that he will leave first. On Monday, August 29th, he resigned peacefully, just as I had told Hilton. And he told the Knesset and his cabinet, I must go, I cannot stay. And this had to do with the war in Lebanon. And again, details on that I can share at a later date. Thursday, September 1st, 1983, the Korean airliner KAL-007 is shot down over Soviet airspace with 269 passengers on board, including Representative Larry McDonald of Georgia, the most vocal anti-communist in Congress. And once that happened, then I heard the Lord say to me, write it down from March 2nd forward. So I wrote everything down that I've just told you. We prayed, and then I sensed that the Lord was telling me to get that letter into the hands of a local realtor whom I knew. I taught at his home a few times before, and he was one of our sponsors of my program on KJOJ, and get it into his hands. He was at that time a strong supporter of Pat Robertson and the 700 Club, and my understanding was he would take this letter, get it into the hands of Pat, and Pat would get it to the president. Well, we were watching on television a few days after I got this into the hands of this realtor, this letter, and Pat, on September 9th, 1983, made the announcement, we've just received a letter from our good friend in Houston, he gave his name, in which he has included a dream of a young man in the Houston area that's a warning for the president not to go to the Philippines. We've reviewed this information and believe the Lord is behind it. We'll do everything we can to convince the president not to go to the Philippines at this time. On September 29th, President Reagan decided to postpone his trip to the Philippines. It was announced to the media on Tuesday, October 4th. And that's how God took a dream from Tomball, Texas, and got it to the White House in 21 days.
Wow. That is amazing. Amazing.
I am always stunned when I tell these stories, because I know who's behind it all.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Now, in 1975, 76, I had other predictions for Gerald Ford, Jimmy Carter, Isabel Perón of Argentina. In 1975, in 77, I predicted how Indira Gandhi would be voted out of office through a no confidence vote, and she fell out of office in 1977. But here's what I want to bring you up to. Tuesday, September 4th, 2011. I'm working in a grocery store. A customer comes through my line. He makes comment on how wonderful it was we finally had a Christian president in the White House, speaking of George Bush Jr., all right? And he asked my feelings on it. I said, well, it's no big deal whether he is or isn't to me. I said, that's between him and God. But what is my attention right now is what's about to happen. That something's going to happen that's catalytic, even catastrophic, that's going to force the Bush administration to become more Orwellian than it's ever been before. That was September 4th, 2011. September 11th, 9/11. And I was at the store working, did not know that this event was taking place until the phone call came. It was from my sister. They gave me the phone call. She was very, very upset. And she was reporting to me what she'd just seen on television. Knowing my background in prophecy, she asked me, she said, what does this mean and where do we go from here? Excuse me. Before I could answer, the second plane struck, and she screamed. And now she's sobbing, and she's begging her brother, what does this mean? What's behind it all? I opened my mouth, Mary, and out of my mouth came these words, Osama Bin Laden.
Wow.
I knew about the man, but he was nowhere on the media radar at this time. And my sister asked me, she said, what are you saying? This is no time to be speaking in tongues. What are you saying? And I told her, I said, this is the man who was behind this attack. It would be days and weeks later before we began to confirm that he was the man. Now, from 81 to 87, I went to work for Jimmy Swaggart as news director for KJOJ. I started the Christian News Network, which was designed and intended to have professional journalists who were Christians reporting world news from a biblical perspective. I had my own news program called The World in Review, in which I produced manuscripts that you see here on the screen of the reports that I gave. The inside manipulators, the exposure of socialism, Antichrist espionage, bioengineering in Revelation 13, the making of God in man's image, and the search for oil in Israel. My central theme has always been Psalms 44, verse 8. In God we have our boast all day long. And that was the cornerstone verse behind my starting the Christian News Network. Now, I only ran that network for about 7 years or so. Finally walked away because it wasn't going anywhere. And never fully appreciating how the Lord would use a visionary and not use him to the full extent. But I walked away from it and buried it. But now you can go online and go to christiannews.net. And there you have the Christian News Network in its fullest glory. And this is a free ad for them. And everything that I imagined it to be back in the 80s, with professional journalists as Christians reporting world news from a biblical perspective. christiannews.net. And again, the pride of a grandfather to a vision just overwhelms me, because it was never a wasted vision. God just had it reserved for somebody else to pick it up and run with it. But it's online today, and it's a good news source if you want to get a biblical worldview to world events. All right.
Awesome.
1999, I'm invited to go on tour with the Prophecy Club, and they opened the door, and I went across the nation, 45 cities in 31 states in 3 months, talking about the embedded internet. And this became my second book, The Embedded Internet, The Final Evolution, in which I talked about how the day would come when the internet would be attached to everything you touch and everything that touches you.
Yeah.
Right? Now, this was 12 years before the birth of the Internet of Things in 2012. And I based it on Revelation 13:15, how the image of the beast will have the power to kill anybody who does not worship the image of the beast. And from a journalistic mind perspective, I'm asking the question, how is he going to know in a world of 7.5 billion people who's worshiping him and who's not? And the answer to that is, unless they're all on the grid. And if you carry one of these on your person, you're on the grid. This generation is the first in the world to become totally transparent. Very, very soon, because of the Internet of Things, every item of clothing you buy, your jewelry, your underwear, your socks, your shoes, your watches, will all have a chip. And you'll be tracked. It's for marketing purposes, all right? But again, the Bible, Revelation 13, is what I've called the most technologically advanced chapter in the entire Bible. Everything in that chapter requires advanced technology to fulfill, even the Antichrist declaring to be God. So, and I have teachings on this and messages and PowerPoints that I can show to your congregations when you're interested. So, that was my whirlwind tour on the Prophecy Club in 1999. This prophetic journey now has taken me to fourth Thursdays of each month. I host what's called the New World Academy on the air on the Doc Green radio show. It's exclusively on the internet. Again, when you go to Wally Ministries or the RevelationFile.com, you'll find the information there that you can link to. I also have my own YouTube channel, RevFile TV, and some friends have opened up that door for us. And so about on a weekly basis or so, I produce a new program, about 4 to 7 minutes, explaining and detailing these things in greater detail. The Lord's given me 5 websites, 20 plus social pages on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube, and what we're now calling the Wood News Group. And again, when you go on to either of these 2 websites, you'll find the drill down to all the places the Lord has me ministering onto. 1974, the first book, Cashless Society. 2000, The Embedded Internet. In 2012, my latest book came out on the mystery, Heaven's Secret Story. And this is a fascinating look into what Paul said in Corinthians, that if the rulers of this age had known what the mystery was, they would not have had Christ crucified. In Revelation 13 is the comment made that the Lamb's book of life, the Lamb whose blood was shed from before the foundations of the world. How did that happen? Before creation. And what the Lord has given to me in this book takes you from the beginning in Genesis 1 and takes you back before creation of just the 3 of them, the family of Elohim, and the reality that they confronted to meet their own need, to be needed. And there was no need for that at the time. And it gives the background of God's thinking They gave birth to the need for creation. It's a remarkable revelation. I'm reading it again myself
I know
because
you
it's
end up having-
a fascinating
Yeah.
story. Okay.
Yeah.
Also, this past year, I put out my first manuscript in over 30 years, Isaiah 18. And you
Right
can-
here.
And you can go to my
Love
website
this.
at wallywoodministries.com, and we're asking for a $5 donation or more, and we will send it to you by PDF, just like we did with Mary. And in this manuscript, chapter 1, Isaiah's prophecy to a distant nation. Chapter 2, the great reveal. Chapter 3, under supreme judgment, this nation that's being spoken of. Chapter 4, a broken nation heard. Chapter 5, the arrival of revival. And chapter 6, 2 Chronicles 7:14, the all-familiar passage, explained in greater detail that most church people do not understand. And so go to these two websites and you can order your copy of this manuscript.
Oh, that is awesome. It is so exciting to have Wally Wood with us today, and we want you to go on to the next program too. If this is the first program you've seen, go to YouTube and watch, go on to Ken Bostrom Ministries and watch last week's program. I am so excited to see what he has to say in the next program. At any time, you can go on to kenbostromministries.org. Also, my blog site, mbostrom2.com. And our YouTube channel, just go to YouTube and type in Ken Bostrom Ministries, and you'll be able to look at all of our past shows. We thank you for being with us today. We hope that you are getting an urgency in your spirit, that you're waking up to the times that we're living in. We are living in the most exciting times in history, and you know, they say this is the time of the Lord of hosts. And so we're not alone in this. The angels are working with us. But you need to be informed. This is not a good time to be asleep at the wheel.
Amen.
So God bless you. Be with us next program.